The soldier starved to fatten his captain's purse was first in a long procession of victims whose sufferings demanded his attention. The cottager evicted from his holding in the great enclosures of the common lands, from the farm laborer living on potatoes while he grows beef and wheat for the city dwellers, the Catholic suffering under political disabilities, the factory worker in Bounderby's mill, the pauper insulted by overseas and thrust into a workhouse by utilitarian philanthropists, of all these, Cobbett in turn appear as the chaotic defender. His political knight errantries sent him into exile once to France and twice across the Atlantic to the United States. They took him for a term into Newgate, where, according to the liberal prison customs of the Newgate of the time, he was able to hold court to the radicals of London. Finally, they led him into the Reform Parliament of 1882 as member, not for one of the rural constituencies on behalf of whose people he had fought so long, but for Oldham, a crowded and dismal north of England factory town, bred of the Industrial Revolution. So this is an introduction to Rural Rights by William Cobbett, whose biography and the biography of the person who has written the introduction, whose name is George Woodcock, is also given in the very first, on the very first page, in the very beginning of the book. And I will read it later, but I want to read more of this introduction because it's very historic, you know. There's so much of history to be found in literary pieces. Cobbett's life was the very stuff of picaresque fiction, but it reads as if a character from Fielding had adventured his way through a world created by Dickens. As in all the great stories of wanderers, the journey is cyclic and the hero returns for renewal to the place that gave him birth, though, like Tennyson's 19th century Ulysses, he does so merely to set out again, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Cobbett's career is punctuated by attempts to return to the country life, from which the attraction of the city, the place where the great political battles are fought, always drew him back. In 1805, having left the army and worked for 5 years as a political journalist in London, the great when on the sickly body of England, he bought a property at Botley and resolved to settle down for the rest of his life as a farmer. Within 2 years, he had declared himself a radical and leapt back into the political struggle. In 3 more years, he was up for trial on a charge of sedition, and his life in the country became interminable, broken by the years in prison and in American exile. Until in 1821, he sold the Botley farm and settled in Kensington. But even on the edge of the smoky wen, he still tried to live at least as a half farmer, growing seeds for sale to sympathetic countrymen while he edited his independent radical journal, The Political Register. Only after he had finally given up the attempt to live as a countryman did Cobbett write his great accounts of the agrarian life. When he set out on the journeys described in Rural Rights, circumstances had already removed him from any direct concern with the life of the fields. He was no longer a working farmer, anxious from day to day about the weather, the conditions of the soil, the state of the markets. He went on his rides armed with that combination of precise observation and involved emotions which produces the ideal travel memoir. Most important, as he travelled in late middle age through a country he had known in a general way since childhood, he was able to see everything with a fresh eye. This was largely because of the changes which had made the south of England in so many ways a different land from which he remembered, not merely reduced in scale as happens to all the settings of our youth, but altered in detail. The open commons he remembered had been enclosed. This is about the field management. The open commons he remembered had been enclosed, the villages were becoming depopulated, the country houses were falling down, the cottagers, England's peasantry had been turning into starving half paupers by the vicious Spinhamland system of public relief, which paid part of the labourers' miserable wages out of the poor rates. Cobbett in the 1820s saw the English countryside at the most depressed phase of the agrarian revolution, between the lost and nostalgically remembered days of subsistence farming under the old open field system and the prosperous era of high farming in the mid Victorian decades, which Cobbett did not live to share. And I think that I am sort of reading this for the first time, and I'll double check on this whole subsistence farming, open farmland, commons, they sound familiar. But I wonder how much of it I read systematically in my PhD readings when my Canadian supervisor, specializing in, supervising my British history PhD, I mean, also had written a book on the ranch system, on the Canadian farmers, animal husbandry people as well. And it was a school that specialized in military history. I had a paper in military history. I had a paper in colonial India, and that was different. But here, um, you know, nobody, I don't think I remember, having this discussion on the farmlands, and it was more like, I'll give you nothing. I don't think he said ever anything about the books. Isn't it weird? Anyways, let me make another one.